In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson famously wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." But Thomas Jefferson also enslaved some 600 people. Jefferson's words and Jefferson's actions can be hard to reconcile. How can a man who believed that all men are equal also have owned slaves? How could a man who called slavery a hideous blot on the United States enslave other human beings until the end of his life? Though Thomas Jefferson's innermost thoughts about slavery are impossible to know, his words and actions during his life suggest that his relationship with the institution of slavery was complex. He was born into a slave-owning family and would come to enslave hundreds of men, women, and children at his Monticello plantation in Virginia. Yet, as a young man, Jefferson pushed for the abolition of slavery and even penned a fiery tirade against it in the Declaration of Independence, though this passage was ultimately cut. During his presidency from 1801 to 1809, Thomas Jefferson brought enslaved people from Monticello to the White House, yet he also ordered Congress to abolish the international slave trade in 1806, calling it a violation of human rights. Jefferson also argued that emancipating slaves quickly would not work because formerly enslaved people were incapable of taking care of themselves. He suggested that there was no place for formerly enslaved people in the United States and that they should be deported to Africa or the West Indies. Yet Jefferson also had a years-long secret relationship with an enslaved woman named Sally Hemings. The exact dynamics of their relationship are unknown, and, of course, as an enslaved woman, Hemings would have had little choice in the matter. But their relationship lasted for 4 decades, and Sally Hemings gave birth to 6 children. Modern science has suggested that Jefferson is very likely the father of all 6 of Hemings' children, and she was seemingly able to negotiate with him for their freedom. Ultimately, Thomas Jefferson was someone who said he abhorred slavery but saw no easy way to end it. He once compared slavery in the United States to holding a wolf by the ear, which could neither be held safely nor let go safely. And, in the end, he left the solving of this problem to future generations. The story of Thomas Jefferson's relationship with slavery helps provide an insightful look at the history of slavery in the United States as a whole. Jefferson disliked slavery, but benefited from it. He sought to abolish it, yet participated in it. Today, we'll look at the arc of Jefferson's words and actions regarding slavery, an institution that he called a moral depravity, even as he enslaved hundreds of people. You're listening to History Uncovered, brought to you by the digital publisher All That's Interesting, where we explore the uncharted corners of the natural world and the world past. I'm All That's Interesting staff writer Kalina Fraga.
And I'm All That's Interesting staff writer Austin Harvey.
Today, we're untangling Thomas Jefferson's complex relationship with slavery. And it is indeed complex.
It's been a while because situations worked out weird. You're in a different state and you happen to have lost power last week.
Mm-hmm.
So we couldn't record then. Yep. So it feels like it's been forever since we did the Malcolm X one and keyed this one up. So
I know, it's so true. A lifetime ago. And I think it's coming out a week late as well because we didn't record it last week.
Right.
And that's the reason why. Yeah, I'm at my parents' house and we lost power for a few days. So
yeah. I almost said what state you were in, and I was like, well, I don't really want to dox your parents. So
I mean, yeah, it's the country. Yeah. And sometimes we lose power in windstorms. Yeah, but here we are, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. So yes, Thomas Jefferson. Basically, I mean, the just like to quickly like set this up. Thomas Jefferson has slavery in his life from the very beginning because he's born on his father's plantation and in Virginia, and his father had 60 enslaved people already. So this is something that Jefferson grew up with. And when Jefferson's father died, Jefferson was only 14. He inherited 30 of these enslaved people. Ooh. So basically right off the bat, from a very, very young age, he owned other human beings.
Yeah, that's such a weird concept to me. I know that sounds so what a nothing burger of a statement. Wow, slavery is such a weird concept. But I think it really landed home because we all know what slavery is and what it means to have enslaved people and to begin to consider other people your property. But I think what really made it register for me there was like, oh, he inherited people. I was like, oh, that's so jeez. It just puts it's like a gross.
It gets a lot weirder with Jefferson in particular. And this next point is a really good example of that. When he gets married, he eventually inherits 135 more enslaved people from his father-in-law. One of these was a 10-year-old girl named Sally Hemings. His father-in-law was actually Sally's father, which means he'd had Sally with one of his enslaved women, which makes Sally Thomas Jefferson's wife's half-sister.
Wow.
So that's, spoiler alert, Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson have a relationship. Within just a few years after this, actually, she was his wife's half-sister. And they apparently looked alike. And,
wow,
his wife died. So, there's some weird, very weird stuff about that whole thing.
So that would make her, his half-sister-in-law?
Yeah.
Wow. Huh.
Mm-hmm. Very strange. But, all this is going on in his family life and his personal life. But at the same time, Jefferson and his political star is, slowly rising in colonial America. And when he's elected to his first office in Virginia, he writes a publication that's called The Summer Review of the Rights of British America for the First Continental Congress. And this is basically arguing that the British Parliament has no right to govern American colonies. And one thing that Jefferson points out in particular is slavery. He writes, basically, I'll kind of summarize this, that people in the colonies want the abolition of slavery. And it was unhappily introduced by the British, and the British have stopped them from trying to end this institution. Which is interesting because, he, comes from a slaveholding background, owns slaves, and yet he's saying this pretty, radical thing about, it's the British, it's their fault, and we don't want this, and you force this on us. This wasn't ultimately published. It was a much more moderate version of it was published by the Congress. But Jefferson, he doesn't change his mind about this when he goes on to draft the Declaration of Independence. The very first draft of that also accuses the king of, he calls it waging cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere. So that's, again, pretty radical. He's saying that the king brought this horrible, inhumane institution to the colonies.
It does feel, not to defend the English king, but it does feel a bit unfair to put it all on him.
Yeah, well, the king, I guess, in Jefferson's view, is saying, we didn't want this, you forced it on us, we tried to stop it, you wouldn't let us, so,
It also, it does feel a little trying to, rid himself of some of that, guilt, almost. It's look, I have slaves, but, I didn't ask for them. It's the king's fault. That was
kind of Jefferson's whole thing was I have them, but the nation has them. We don't know what to do with them, and it's their fault.
Right.
But anyway, ultimately, this was not included in the Declaration of Independence. Basically because a lot of people did not agree with Jefferson and did not want to, call slavery a war against human nature itself or anything like that because they were slaveholders. And obviously, there were a lot of them involved in the foundation of the country. Ultimately, as he continues to become, more and more involved in politics and everything, he continues to speak out against slavery. In 1778, he drafts a law in Virginia to prohibit the importation of enslaved Africans. In 1781, he writes this pamphlet, the Notes on the State of Virginia, and he writes about the evils of slavery. He says, "I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever." That's pretty forceful language.
Yeah, man, they were so eloquent back then.
They were so eloquent. Yeah, I know. But he also in the same document was enslaved people are really limited in their abilities, and so maybe freeing them, I don't know. And he, at the same time, he does acknowledge that their limitations might be caused by being enslaved. Right. So
he was almost there. He was 99% of the way there with it.
Almost there. Huh? He was pushing for this, but as his political star continues to rise, he stops. This language is much more muted.
Yeah, you have to kind of moderate yourself to win over the voters who have slaves.
The South, which is a huge, important voting bloc and
they
segment.
Really liked their slavery back then. We fought a whole war about it.
Yes, and it was very important to their economy at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, that's kind of what he's been saying in his young adulthood. At the same time as the last couple of examples, he begins this relationship with Sally Hemings, who, again, is an enslaved woman. Actually, she's still a girl. She was 14, and he was 40. Not ideal. This happened when he was in Paris with her and her brother. And when they were in Paris, Sally and her brother, James, were exposed to ideas of freedom that they'd never really encountered back in the United States.
If they're exposed to these new ideas in Paris, what was the world philosophy on slavery at this point in time? Because obviously a lot of European nations did it at one point.
England did abolish slavery before the U.S. did, although I couldn't tell you the exact date of that.
I can look it up real quick. 1833 in England. In France, 1794.
So after the French
Revolution.
Yeah.
And then a second time in 1848.
That was possibly related to Haiti, I think. Yeah. So they were able to see a different world while they were there. And neither wanted to go home. I mean, both negotiated with Jefferson, and Jefferson negotiated back. He agreed to free James if James taught another person what he learned in Paris, which he did. Sally refused to return, but negotiated quote-unquote extraordinary privileges with Jefferson, including the freedom for her future children. And she was pregnant at the time with his child. So, again, 14 years old. She ultimately had 6 children, 4 of whom survived to adulthood, and they were all freed or simply allowed to leave Monticello, his plantation. 2 of her daughters could pass as whites. They just kind of left and, just gave up that heritage and passed as white. Sally Hemings was freed after Jefferson's death by his daughter, and in one census, she and her sons were described as white as well. So this suggests that they were white passing.
No, she was half white, so yeah,
at least half white. Half white. We don't know what her mother's heritage was and what happened to her. So
that's interesting. That is an interesting note of these were freed people, but they passed as white, so they probably got along decently fine after that. But if you were if they were much darker skin tone, I'm curious how that would have.
They would not have gotten along as fine. Yeah, they would have had a lot more challenges.
Because it was you're technically free, but also most people don't consider you a person still. So how free is that freedom?
Right, exactly. And it does make this idea. It just kind of points to the absurdity of slavery as it's based on skin color in the United States, because Sally Hemings and her children apparently could pass as white, and yet they were enslaved. Right. So yeah, I mean, obviously it's
it's a bad concept regardless of why you're doing it.
It's a bad concept. Yeah, just a concept doesn't really make a whole lot of sense when you look at it closely at all. Yeah, it is really dumb. It's really dumb. Thomas Jefferson, though, continued to engage, with this institution. He ultimately enslaved 600 people during his life. At any given time, there were 130 enslaved people at Monticello. And while he spoke about improving conditions for enslaved people or, slowly ending slavery or curbing the practice somehow, conditions at his plantation were pretty typical for the time.
That was what I was about to ask, if he was he treats them better or something, but it doesn't seem like that's the case.
I mean, Thomas Jefferson was probably not involved in the day-to-day stuff on his plantation. But he had overseers, and they had a reputation for cruelty and violence. There's no evidence that Jefferson, beat his slaves, but the overseers certainly did, and he certainly ordered them to be beaten. And they, enslaved people on almost any plantation faced, terrors of violence, family separation, emotional, psychological, and sexual abuse. So life for them wasn't much better, even though, he spoke about all these grand ideas.
Yeah. God, how angry would you be? Unfortunately, a lot of enslaved people were never taught to read. But imagine if you were someone who was enslaved on Thomas Jefferson's farm and you heard the things he was writing about, and you were wait, the guy who owns this plantation is saying that we shouldn't even be here.
Right.
I'd be livid.
Yeah. I mean, people were livid, enslaved people, of course, if they had access to those ideas, which most of them didn't.
Well, I'm sure they were all thinking it too, privately, right?
Yeah. Yeah. In his life, he sold 110 enslaved people. So this is sending them to other plantations, often further into the South where conditions were worse. In his life, he freed just 10. Remember, he owned 600, and they were all members of the Hemings family. Jeez. So, yes.
Which also means they were kind of members of his own family.
That's right.
So, Little nepotism there.
A lot of nepotism. He clearly spoke out against slavery in some ways, but he saw its power and its benefits. In Virginia, between 1790 and 1830, the slave population grew about 60%.
Ugh.
He discouraged crops that relied on slave labor, like tobacco, but ultimately Virginia's most valuable commodity was enslaved people, like not crops.
Right.
And Jefferson knew that. In 1792, he wrote to George Washington, whose name should ring a bell for everybody, that he was making a 4% profit every year based on the birth of enslaved children.
Jeez.
And in 1830, he also wrote, "I consider a woman who brings a child every 2 years as more profitable than the best man on the farm," an enslaved woman. "What she produces is an addition to the capital, while his labors disappear in mere consumption."
Ugh.
So that's all pretty,
Ew.
well put.
Ew.
Very well put. As president, although he initially didn't want to, he resisted it. He brought enslaved people to the White House, which makes him the first president to do that, although the only president to live in the White House before him was John Adams, and John Adams didn't own slaves.
Right.
He didn't want to do it. I mean, it didn't look great, but also he didn't want them to be exposed to new ideas about freedom in Washington, D.C. But as president, he also banned the international slave trade. So there was that, I guess. He told Congress the ban was needed to withdraw the citizens of the United States from all further participation in those violations of human rights. Again, interesting and forceful, but
right. It's kind of hard to like look at Thomas Jefferson saying this in Congress, and then like I'm imagining being like a member of Congress as he's saying this, and you like look over his shoulder and there's like 2 enslaved people standing behind him. You're just like,
Yeah, most of them had slaves, so they were probably like angry he was even doing this.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah. But this did ban the importation of slaves from abroad. By this point, there were millions already in the United States, and so this only solved one part of the problem. And the slave trade did continue illegally after this.
Sure, yeah,
it wasn't totally stopped.
Plus, like it doesn't do that much when slavery is already falling out of fashion in other parts of the Western world.
Well, I mean, but it was very fashionable in the United States.
Well, true, yeah.
In certain circles, like it was still very important to the Southern economy and everything.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, Monticello, which is like they run the website about his history and everything. They say his basic beliefs never really changed. From the 1770s until his death, he advocated a plan of gradual emancipation. So he said, first, abolish the transatlantic slave trade. As president, check. Second, improve the lives of enslaved people by improving living conditions and scale down physical punishment. Unclear how he did that. Yeah. Third, all enslaved people born after a certain date would be freed, followed by total abolition. But he did not believe that white and black Americans could live together in the same nation. He thought they needed to be in 2 separate nations because he believed enslaved people were limited and likely to bear grudges against their owners, which...
Well, yeah.
Yeah, so he thought that deportation to Africa or the West Indies was the ideal solution to this.
Interesting.
Which I think if you really think about this, there are like Black Americans who've been in the nation longer than a lot of white Americans because they were here from the very, very beginning.
Right.
So the idea to like deport them somewhere else just makes like
be like,
sense.
we picked you up in Africa, keep you here for like 4 generations, then send your kids back. But it's like, well, they don't know what Africa's like.
Yeah, they're Americans. I mean, yeah. So anyway, that was kind of how he thought this could be resolved.
Yeah, that is fascinating. It is, it's weird. Like anyone who's not of British or like African American ancestry is like pretty new to the country still.
Yeah.
Like Italian Americans aren't that far back, and there was a lot of racist pushback against Italians when they first started coming over.
And the Irish. Those are both probably in like the 19th century.
Yeah.
Germans. Yeah. As Jefferson, even as he was dying, he was thinking about slavery and his legacy and everything. He dies in the spring of 1826. Or as he lay dying in the spring of 1826. Of course, he died on the 4th of July.
Oh, did he? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. He and John Adams both died on the 4th of July on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
Whoa. I had no idea about that. That's crazy.
John Adams' last words were, "Thomas Jefferson lives," although Jefferson had died a few hours earlier.
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that wild? Frenemies, Jefferson and Adams, but it's a different podcast.
Yeah, the more you know, geez.
Yeah, he He wrote on slavery. Well, he was writing a letter kind of defending his inaction on slavery. And he said, "A good cause is often injured more by ill-timed efforts of its friends than by the arguments of its enemies. My sentiments have been 40 years before the public. Had I repeated them 40 times, they would only have become the more stale and threadbare." I mean, it's like, I don't know.
I will say.
Maybe.
I will say, he got the number of years right. 1826, he says this.
I think so,
That his sentiments were 40 years ahead of the nation's. And then 40 years later...
I think he's meaning this 40 years
saying it for 40
saying
years.
these things.
Damn.
Yeah.
Damn. I thought he was saying, like, my ideas are so good on this. They're 40 years ahead.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's kind of eerie because 40 years after that, we were fighting a war about this. So...
Yeah, not quite, but I mean, the Civil War is very soon after this, really, in the scope of things. His granddaughter also writes him about slavery in the South, and she says the canker of slavery eats into our hearts and diseases the whole body, but it's ulcer at the core.
Wow. God.
And he responded, "One fatal stain deforms what nature had bestowed on us of her fairest gifts." So, in private, he was pretty radical.
Yeah.
He did keep this really throughout his life. He said radical things about slavery, for the time.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's really hard to, balance with what he actually did about slavery.
Right.
His own slave. He owned slaves. He could have acted on this.
That's the part that's more of a hiccup, because it's there's only so much you can do as the president when you have to, take into consideration the interests of, everybody.
Well, and your Congress is, a lot of the Congress is the South.
Right.
You're from the South. That's a hard thing to do.
Right. But yeah, it's his own personal, the fact that he regularly kept slaves. Makes sense when he was younger and his father died and he inherited a bunch of people. It was well, sure. But then you kept doing it for years.
You very much engage with it. You acknowledge the profit of it, how you were benefiting personally from it. You had a relationship with an enslaved woman for who was most of your life.
Younger.
Yeah.
Which I know that
you
wasn't
had lots of children with her,
but,
and still... Yeah, it's really, really hard to balance those two things.
Yeah. Complicated is definitely the word for it.
Yes.
Also, do you think it was exhausting to talk like that all the time? I
don't know.
It's nice, it's eloquent, but it's whoa, putting a lot of thought into it, huh?
I think Jefferson was especially educated and wealthy and of this plantation class. So he probably spoke in a certain way that wasn't the way everyone spoke. But
yeah, now we're just firing off texts LOL, look at this sandwich I'm eating.
In any case, Jefferson does die on July 4th. He's widely mourned. He's seen as an American hero, a formative founding father, and his presidency was seen as very, very important as well. He became president in 1800. This was after Washington and Adams, who were Federalists. And it was seen as a revolution of kind of a new chapter, a new, better chapter of American history, because he was followed, by his friend Madison and so forth. So that's kind of how he was seen when he died, and how he was seen, I would say, probably for the next 100 years, 150 years. And it's only really recently that people have been
let's reevaluate maybe a little bit.
Well, these rumors about Sally Hemings existed in his lifetime, but it wasn't confirmed through DNA until I think in the 90s that the children were very, very likely Jeffersons. Her family lore all said they were, and they finally got this DNA analysis. So that's very, very recent.
Yeah, that is very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, so now it's now people are reconsidering him. I think, it's so easy often in our current times and in looking at history to be someone's bad or good or, black or white or whatever. And it's just complicated. He did some really bad things. He had some really interesting and progressive and radical ideas. Those two things exist, I guess. But to kind of evaluate both of them.
Yeah, well, and I think there's also been a significant change in the way that Americans talk about American politics. I feel like there used to be a lot more reverence for the title of president. And I think that kind of started to fall apart with Nixon, where it was the first kind of really big rock the boat of the institution scandal with Watergate, where it was
Yeah, right. Definitely lost trust in the office after that.
I don't think they ever really... Well, and I will say too, that's around the same time SNL started premiering. And there was a regular feature of them to poke fun at presidential candidates and presidents and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. And television, I think, really changed the presidency as well, because
I mean, I grew up in like an age where Will Ferrell was playing George Bush on TV. So I always was just like, George Bush is an idiot, because that's how I, as a kid, saw him portrayed. And it sort of made me be like, why should I give a shit what the president thinks ever?
Yeah, because they're mocked so much.
Right. From a personal standpoint. But I'm sure like in 1850, people were talking about Thomas Jefferson. They were, he was a great man. You watch your mouth.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, unless they were, of the other party maybe, but not really, because he was the founding father and everything. And
yeah, that's true. He has like kind of a special legacy. I think it's really interesting too that he was the candidate for the Democratic Republican Party, and then it was the Federalists being on the opposition party at that point.
Right. Yeah, the parties have really changed.
Yeah, it's almost like it doesn't even really matter what you call it anymore. Like we just kind of landed on Democrats and Republicans, but it's like it's not like Democrats are out here saying we should vote like a real democracy. Like every person votes, every citizen votes on something. Like we're still a republic at the end of the day. So it's just funny how much language can change, but like not even matter at all that it changed.
Yeah. Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see, like, I mean, our parties haven't really changed in terms of like the two-party system. And, in the 19th century, there were so many, or there were lots of different parties. Like the Republican Party was only born in the 1850s, or maybe not even 1860, I guess 1850s, late 1850s. But, just like stuff changed a lot back then. We've been on kind of the same course ever since.
Well, that's how it is in England today, is they have like 30 parties that all like actually have a decent shot at winning elections.
Mostwhere in Europe, they do. And even in like our two-party system, like the two parties are like, they're really split into like different factions, but they're not called that faction. They're not their own party or anything. Yeah. But they could be. I mean, that could be an interesting.
I think that's a change a lot of people would like to see.
Yeah, I do too.
I think the binary option has really felt limiting for a lot of people. I think you see that in voter turnout numbers.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, in Europe as well, you see a lot of like stalemates and, coalitions that don't work. And I don't know. I can't remember who said it. Someone said this, and I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Benjamin Franklin. But anyway, he said, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others.
Yeah.
So we're still figuring it all out.
The best of the worst.
Yeah. Yeah. But Jefferson, interesting guy. The one person I would love to talk about on the podcast, but I think it's too niche, is John Quincy Adams, John Adams' son, because he was like a flamethrower. He did all sorts. He was president, but he's also did all sorts of other things in his life. And I think after he was president, he went back and served in the House, and he was against slavery, like just against it at a time. It was so unpopular to do that. But yeah, really interesting. Kind of an overlooked guy, but
yeah. And John Adams didn't have any slaves either, right? You said so.
No. I mean, they were both from Boston and had plantations up there.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
Yeah, I find this stuff fascinating.
It's always fun to look back and see what was considered radical at a certain point in time.
Yeah,
and how like now, if you were like, if someone today was like, we should bring back slavery, it'd be like, what? It's not even a thing you like talk about. But yeah, it's fascinating that there was at one point in time like this, like if you said that was like a radical thing to say.
It's interesting because like the institution of slavery as an institution maybe is gone, but there is like slavery like around the world. People who are maybe like tricked into slavery, like tricked into like taking a job that's actually like working, 20-hour days and things like that. But the way it was back then, very different.
Yeah. And because I've been doing a lot of stuff this week about the Gilded Age, that's 1870. It's interesting to me that right after the abolition of slavery, we entered a period of like disastrous overwork, terrible working conditions, like people be like not officially slavery, but subjugation that's not far
very
off.
Close. Yeah, right. Working 6 days a week and can't take time off and
just disease spreading and no one cares because social Darwinism was like a thing.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think the post-Civil War years are often so overlooked. Maybe we discussed this before, because it goes Civil War, lots of stuff, World War I, but like that period is sort of like lost in the mix a bit.
Yeah. I think it kind of just gets boiled down to like life sucked. for the average person.
Yeah, but it's also, like, so interesting because, like, after the Civil War, like, Reconstruction had all these, like, grand ideas and promises and then it all just, like, collapsed.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
That was Rutherford B. Hayes was the one who, like, really put an end to that.
That's right, yeah. Rutherford B. Hayes. We don't have names like that anymore. Rutherford.
No. Some old names are coming back.
Bring it back. I like old names.
I do too.
I guess the next one then is mine again, which is going to be on. This idea came from someone who wrote in about wanting to hear something about tsunamis. So we're doing an episode on the 2004 tsunami, the Boxing Day tsunami, Indian Ocean tsunami. It's called really devastating, one of the worst natural disasters of all time. That's our next one coming out.
Yeah, fun.
Yeah, I know. My parents, they do live on an island, and we're in an earthquake-prone region, and sometimes it's like, I wonder what would happen.
Yeah, really.
I wonder what would happen. But anyway, that's the next one coming out.
The problem with talking about history is that it's often not pleasant.
That's true.
But
very dramatic.
Yeah, it's important.
Most of the time.
But yeah, that'll be interesting. So stay tuned for that. This is another one that I don't really know too much about it, despite having been alive when it happened. Because I was 8.
I remember I was like in the airport. I think my parents, we were all somewhere for Christmas and we were flying home because this happened on December 26th. And all the newspapers, like all the kiosks were about it. And it left like an impression on me because it was so many people and all the stories. And I was old enough, I guess I was 14. I was old enough to like kind of absorb what the tragedy was. And it really, really stuck with me.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to talk about this some more.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Yeah, I was 8 years old, so I was not paying much attention.
Not quite absorbing the tragedy. History Happy Hour for February 2025.
Yeah, welcome to the History Happy Hour segment.
Yay! Just the two of us this time.
Yeah. Amber is unfortunately unable to join us this episode.
Yes,
but that's okay.
Yeah,
that's okay. February. We're a little late on it for a variety of reasons we mentioned in the main episode.
Yeah,
but also I initially said we should wait.
Right.
Until the beginning of March to do this because otherwise it would have been like February 14th. It
would have been pretty early in the month and not a lot had happened for our news-wise purposes. But we can start as we normally do with some of our news stories, which are actually all Amber's news stories this month. The first one is my favorite kind of story. It was a cache of 1800-year-old Roman coins, which were found by a metal detectorist in England. Crazy.
It happens so often.
It happens so much. It's so funny.
It's unreal how often this happens.
I like every story. It's like, I was just walking in a field and like suddenly I started picking up some, and it's literally what happened to this guy. His name is David Dunn. He's a bathroom fitter / metal detector enthusiast. And yeah, he was like, with the farmer's permission, investigating these little pings on his metal detector, and he came across a hoard of 50 Roman coins from the late 3rd century. Not only were they minted under the reigns of several different emperors, but they also contained a previously unknown variety of coins from ancient Rome. So it's a pretty exciting find. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, that is really exciting.
Yeah.
Because not often you find, more often than you'd think, but not as often. Usually it's like a single coin or a couple coins, not like a bag of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, cool that there were ones that like they didn't even really know about before. That is
So
very neat.
It went up for auction. I guess he tried to give them to museums and no one was all that interested, so he put them up for auction. I guess maybe like at some point you have enough Roman coins. I don't know.
Yeah. But, you really only need like one of each for a museum display.
Right.
Otherwise, after that, it's just like, well, it's more coins.
It's more coins. But anyway, they're supposed to sell for $2,000 and yeah, an exciting find, another cool kind of metal detector success story. Yeah,
well, it's fascinating too because it looks like he is a pretty avid historical artifact collector.
Yeah.
Because it's not just coins. This discovery was just coins, but there's another photo here in the article of like other things he's found. There's like rings and bracelets and it looks like bells.
Yeah, he's found all sorts of stuff over his searches.
Yeah, I think we've brought it up before, but like I would never buy a metal detector because I don't think there's much I can find in the suburbs of Pittsburgh.
I don't know. It might be like Civil War.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe
stuff.
Some like bullet casings or something. But
Revolutionary
I'm not going to
War.
find Roman coins.
Probably not. Probably
But
not.
if you're living in anywhere in Europe or you're traveling in Europe,
yeah,
get a metal detector because you literally can just walk 5 minutes out your back door, apparently, and find something.
yeah. And if you do, send us an email and let us know. We'll write a news story on it. But
Yeah, that's the deal we have. If you hear this and you're inspired to buy a metal detector and then you find coins, you don't have to send us the coins, just send us a picture and let us write the story first.
yeah, we would love that. Like actually.
Advance notice.
Yeah, that was kind of it for that story. I mean, it was sort of very simple. They found these coins and they're really cool.
Yeah, there's not much else to say about it.
Yeah.
It happens a lot. But this next story, there is a little bit more to it. They found in a 1600-year-old necropolis in France this purple fabric that was woven with gold threads, which purple and gold, I think even today, I think we still associate them with like, well, I was going to say like a Crown Royal bag is purple and gold. But there was a reason for that, and that's because purple and gold were obviously colors of royalty, especially, almost 2,000 years ago. These were not like purple and blue were like very exquisite colors because they don't really, there's no way to make those dyes naturally.
Well, the blue one was really hard. Like it was made with like snails. Like it was really, really hard to make.
Yeah. Or that like Egyptian blue.
Yeah.
Which was
or
like
was it purple? But I think it
was there's Egyptian blue, and then there's I forget the name. Egyptian blue is for sure that. And then there's like some sort of purple that was also very special.
I think I wrote an article
that was from
on
the Roman world.
But I forget. And it's made from snails anyway, and it's very labor intensive.
Yeah.
And I think they know how to make it now, but it's like sort of not really.
Tyrian purple.
Tyrian purple. Okay, yeah.
Our article linked back to that one, so I was able to find that.
Perfect.
Yeah. Ew, yeah, made from the mucus of snails.
Yes.
And then Egyptian blue was made from like a crushed up powdered rock.
Oh.
But yeah, these things are not easy to make. So coming across this gold and purple fabric in this necropolis was very exciting because they were like, oh, that means someone of high status had to have been buried here at some point.
Yeah, wrapped in a shroud or something.
Right, or a tunic. And then it was apparently a very long and extensive process to actually try and like analyze this little bit of cloth. They said it took over a year.
Wow. It must have been so delicate.
Yeah, they had these like little like clods that had the textile in it. And then they refrigerated it, and then it took them another year to extract the fragments of fabric with tweezers from the first clod alone. But what happened was they were able to like kind of examine this with more detail, and they realized that all of it was woven in this kind of floral pattern, this very intricate floral pattern.
Wow.
Which it is on temporary display at the Musée de Quai Branly in Paris until July. So if anyone's in Paris or traveling to Paris,
that'd be really cool to see
this. Yeah, but yeah, it's like the initial picture from when they pulled it out, it just kind of looks like a jumbled mess of fabric,
right,
mixed with some dirt, and then they go through this painstaking process, and you can very clearly see, even after 1,600 years, this intricate floral pattern. So it's very, very cool.
Yeah, things like that you imagine like wouldn't survive all this time. So it must be so thrilling as an archaeologist to find something like that.
Yeah, I mean, shirts I ordered a year ago are falling apart.
Right, yeah, exactly. So you don't have that purple clothing money. So, yeah. I guess our third story, this last one, the scientists were investigating a cave in Spain, Cava de Dones. Don't speak Spanish.
Cova de les Dones?
Cava de my brain goes into French, and I'm like, I should be like, Cave de Dona.
It's kind of fun to say, Cova de les Dones.
They were investigating Paleolithic rock art when they found Roman artifacts instead. So that was exciting and unexpected. They found a coin from the reign of Emperor Claudius, which was 41 to 54 CE, and 15 inscriptions that they're still translating in the cave's interior chamber, which suggests it was used as some kind of sanctuary in the 1st century. Cool.
Yeah, very interesting.
Very interesting.
Like a little cult site. people meeting up in secret.
Yeah, something's going on there.
Yeah. You know that like was from Monty Python, that like joke where it's like no one expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that joke.
It's the opposite thing with these stories where it's like always expect the Romans.
Yeah.
They're always there.
They did leave a lot of stuff behind. Yeah. So that was another cool kind of unexpected story, but a lot of ancient stuff going on in February for us. It seems like coins, threads.
I would recommend going and checking these out on the site because they are, unfortunately for our current purposes, very visual stories.
That's true. Yeah.
But the pictures attached are very, very cool to look at. Because there's like a lot of stuff going on in this cave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was curious what they meant. They couldn't translate the inscriptions. I was like, weren't they not like in Latin?
I think it's just because I think they might be, but I'm looking at them right now and they're kind of faded and they kind of just look like, I mean, they've been etched into the side of the wall, the cave wall.
So it's hard to read them clearly.
Yeah, because they didn't do a lot of like rounded letters. So it kind of just looks like a child's drawing of a pine forest. Like a bunch of triangles all stacked on top of each other.
Interesting.
But I don't think the Romans there 2,000 years ago were really concerned about the legibility long term.
Yeah. Huh. Well, interesting. Like I'll be curious to see if more comes out about this. It sounds like a really fascinating discovery.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we covered like much more than that in February, and like you said, you can check out this stuff on the site or social media or whatever. But yeah, lots of news in February, as always, and there were also lots of anniversaries.
Yeah, big month and big year for anniversaries.
That's true. Yeah, 25.
But it is. Yeah, I was gonna say it is a 25. So any 5s or 10s are always kind of. I don't know. I don't know why big events happen in such convenient number of years.
Often
seems
they do.
To be the case. Seems to be the case.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll start off. This is a story we've covered twice now.
It feels like it.
From two different perspectives. Yeah. But February 2nd of this year marked the 100th anniversary of Gunnar Kaasen and Balto arriving in Nome at the tail end of the Nome Serum Run. We did an episode on Balto. Where I was worried that we were going to have to cancel him. Thankfully, we didn't.
That's right, yeah.
And then we did one on Togo as well.
Yes.
Who was another dog who was in that race. So if you're curious, you can go back and listen to those to get the full story or, check it out on the website. But yeah, very interesting story. Or you could just watch Balto. I mean.
Yeah, I think the stuff on the site maybe tells another side of the story because Balto, I mean, to your point about him being canceled, like, there were other dogs involved and
right.
But there's a really interesting story. But that's the 100th anniversary of them arriving in Nome. So another thing that happened in February, a bit less of a happy anniversary. On February 9th, 1950, Joseph McCarthy, who was then a little-known junior senator, gave a speech in Wheeling, Virginia. And he claimed during the speech to have a list of over 200 men in the State Department, or people, they're mostly men, who were members of the Communist Party and members of a spy ring. And this, though McCarthy changed his story quite a lot, he changed the number of people on the list and who was on it. And though no one was ever proven to be a communist in the State Department, he sparked this mass hysteria about communists and spies in American life.
Yep. We're still feeling the impact of that today.
McCarthyism is still a term to this day that people would use to refer to this paranoia and enemies hidden within and things like that. But he was ultimately, he was an alcoholic and he was censured by the Senate and died, kind of in disgrace. But for a time, people were listening to what he was saying, and it was just captivating and horrifying. And people thought they were communists hidden everywhere.
Yeah,
during the
people ratting out their neighbors, outing them as commies.
Yeah,
lots of spying. Yeah, not a good time. That does bring us to our monthly cocktail.
Yes.
Speaking of alcoholism and communism. The Moscow Mule. It's a classic. I don't even need to look up a recipe for this one. It's however much vodka you want to put in. I'm not even going to tell you an amount. However much vodka you want to put in, some ginger beer and a lime.
In a copper mug, right?
Better if it's in a copper mug. Yeah.
Yeah. Delicious.
Which I do have a copper mug. It's nice.
That's nice. That's a good thing to have. Yeah. I used to really like Moscow Mules. I don't drink a lot of vodka anymore though.
Yeah, it's so simple.
Yeah.
So basic. And you can, the best thing about the mule is you can just replace vodka with whatever you want. And it's just a different kind of mule.
That's true.
Put in bourbon, it's a Kentucky mule. You put in tequila, it's a Mexican mule.
What if you put in gin?
A London mule.
Okay. Nice. I'll have a London mule, please.
Yeah. And I'm sure an Irish mule is if you use Irish whiskey instead of bourbon. Scotch mule.
Yeah. Boy, all sorts of variations.
The recipe never changes, though. It's great.
Amazing. Well, there you have it.
Classic. It's my go-to like wedding drink.
Oh, nice.
If you're at a wedding, you just get a mule.
Yeah. The next anniversary is actually something we've also covered in depth. And actually, also, I was looking through a magazine at my parents' place. I think it was a copy of The New Yorker. And this is about Floyd Collins, who was a cave explorer who died to great, not fanfare exactly, but his ordeal captivated the nation at the time.
Yeah. They set up basically like a shanty town outside of the cave.
Yeah.
And we're like selling merchandise.
Right.
It was very strange.
It was a huge news story. And I think someone who covered it won like a Pulitzer Prize because he went down in the cave to interview Floyd Collins. Floyd Collins likely died on February 13th, 1925, 100 years ago. But there's a musical about him. And that musical apparently is coming back to New York. So maybe our Floyd Collins content is about to spike.
Yeah. I think we played a little bit of one of the songs from it.
We may have. That sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember our TikTok for that it was like one of our early ones and it did like really, really well. And I was like, oh, cool.
It blew up.
Yeah.
I was very surprised.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird. It's like a really sad, and in terms of like stories go, like not all that exciting. Like he's in this cave and he dies.
Yeah. He's just kind of stuck there. I mean, nothing else happened. Right. Like he got, that's what I'm not trying to discredit the story, but it's like, as far as like, was it eventful? It's like, well, no, the guy got stuck in a cave by the nature of what happened. It could not be eventful.
Yeah. But the fanfare, the media spectacle of it was like, interesting. Yeah.
Which is really interesting that our TikTok and like YouTube short for that one are two of the biggest ones that I've made.
I know. Yeah.
Because it's like, it was a media spectacle 100 years ago. And I'm not going to like call it a media spectacle now.
Our TikTok,
but it's interesting that it was a high performer because it's like 100 years ago it made sense because it was like part of the excitement was that it was like you could cover it live for the first time. It was like one of the first real big events where people were like, oh, we can get this news in real time thanks to technology. I don't know why people are so excited about it in 2025.
I don't know really either, but it's certainly been a big one. People are interested in Floyd Collins.
Maybe it's like maybe it's because it plays into people's like primal fears.
It is true that we've done a couple of stories about people who died in caves. Well, at least one I can think of, the Nutty Putty Cave.
Yeah, Jim Jones.
Yeah, and that's also done very well.
Jim Jones? John Jones?
I don't think Jim Jones is the cult leader, right?
John Jones in Nutty Putty Cave.
John Jones.
My bad. Misspoke. Yeah, not Jim Jones.
Yeah. I think to your point, it does kind of tap into like ancient prehistoric like fears. I don't know. I mean, it's like, they're both kind of horrible.
I mean, it's like being trapped in a cave or like drowning in an ocean or going down in like that Titanic submarine, right? That was a big media spectacle.
That's true. Yeah.
Was that last year? Jeez.
Was
that 2024 or was that 2023?
I don't know. Those 2 years kind of meld together for me. I have no idea.
Yeah. But I guess, point being, it's like you hear about these like horrific circumstances and you're like, that's like never not going to be uncomfortable for people.
Yeah. So it's the 100th anniversary. Maybe that's why they're doing the show again. Because it's like, well, I don't know. Actually, I have no idea if that's connected, but it would make sense.
I mean, I think that, that makes sense.
Yeah. So R.I.P. Floyd Collins' body is also a whole other like story. Cause
yeah. That's actually the more exciting part of the story.
That's
the
true.
fact that his body. Like, listeners, picture this in your head for a minute. This man's entire body was stolen multiple times. By different people.
That's so weird.
Like, what are you gonna do with it?
Didn't they put it in like a different cave for a while, and then people would go down and look at it, and then they stole it?
And then they lost his foot at one
I think
point.
so. That sounds right. Yeah.
There's like so much weird stuff. It's like you're just taking a man's dead body. It's so weird.
So strange.
It's so strange.
Yeah.
You can make a really funny movie about that.
Stealing Floyd Collins's body.
Like, yeah. You could call it here. Actually, no one's allowed to have this. This is my idea. It's called Stealing Floyd Collins.
Hey.
And it's like a slapstick satirical comedy about the people who stole his body.
I love it. Should write it.
That'll be after my movie about the 1904 Olympic marathon.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The next one is about this woman. It was her birth date, allegedly, Jean Calmet, who...
Oh, is she that really old person?
She's the oldest verified person ever. She died at 122.
Yeah, and they asked her how she lived so long, and she was like, I smoke a lot of cigarettes and drink Dr. Pepper or something.
She did start smoking in her later years. She said she lived to an old age by dousing her meals in olive oil, drinking copious amounts of red wine, and eating 2 pounds of chocolate a week for most of her life. She was also really wealthy and didn't have to work for most of her life, which I think also helped.
Right.
Also helped.
But there was like some controversy about her because there were claims that she wasn't actually who she said she was, and that she was either her own daughter, who was just pretending to be, because they look so much alike, pretending to be her mom.
Yeah,
there was a Russian study in 2019 that said that the actual Jean Calment died in 1930s.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Skeptics say that she died in 34, and her daughter assumed her identity and then like was able to live to this long age. But she is still verified. Like they did verify her,
right?
Based on the data they had. So she's the oldest person to be verified, and she was born February 21st, 1875. So,
yeah. I think she was on to something there, because there's a lot of doctors who recommend olive oil now.
Yeah. The Mediterranean diet.
My girlfriend works for it's not an ad agency, it's like a company that they happen to own a bunch of different brands that are all focused on like health and wellness stuff, and she edits social media ads for this company. But one of their things is like they have a doctor who's just like, oh yeah, buy my olive oil and just do a shot of it every day.
That's a thing. Yeah. Olive oil shots. Yeah.
Right. And then there's some evidence supporting that red wine is good for your heart health.
Yeah.
Not if you don't drink it in excess.
I'm trying to think of what an olive oil shot would be like. That's a lot of olive oil all at once.
It's not pleasant. I've done it. I tried it. It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's like you can really feel it just coating your whole throat.
Wow. Yeah, that's descriptive. I don't know how I would like that, but yeah. All right.
I don't like it, no, but I do cook with olive oil all the time.
Me too. Our last anniversary is the 80th anniversary of the raising of the flag on Iwo Jima, February 23rd, 1945, during World War II.
It would be fair to say that's one of the most famous photographs of all time.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely one of the most famous photos of all time in American history.
I guarantee anyone listening to this has seen this photo.
Yeah. It was, raised after this really devastating battle for Iwo Jima, which lasted more than a month and killed almost 6,000 Marines. They did take control of the island, but the war would ultimately continue for several more months. So it was like, I think the photo contains like a lot of like emotion for that reason. Yeah.
Yeah. This year is going to be a lot of, over the next few months, I'm sure we're going to be bringing up World War II a lot.
Probably.
Just because it's been 80 years.
Yeah.
Since that happened.
And there's a lot between like this February until like the war starts to end over. Yeah, I guess the bombs are dropped in August and then, So
a lot happened very quickly as soon as America joined the war.
Yeah.
Things progressed very quickly after that point.
Yeah, but it was still like, a slog. It was, what, was it 4 years or 3? It's 4, no? Pearl Harbor is 1941.
Was it 41? Yeah. It was like end of 41,
Yeah, December. Yeah, a lot did happen. I'm sure that will be definitely coming up again and again in future history happy hours. There you have it. Eventful month for February, and now we're into March. And
in March,
I'm sure there'll be more stuff to talk about soon.
Yeah, if you're listening to this part, that means you're a member. So thanks for supporting us, the website and the show. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something new. If you want to learn more new things, again, allthat'sinteresting.com. We are constantly updating the website. every single day. Some exciting stuff coming up on that as well. So stay tuned for that. Follow us on social media accounts, Instagram, History Uncovered Podcast, Real History Uncovered on TikTok. Follow us on YouTube. Give the show a nice rating. If you so enjoy. I complain a lot about about reading some of the reviews on Apple Podcasts. I saw one recently that made me very happy.
Oh, good.
So there was one nice one, and it did actually make my day.
Oh,
so yeah. If
nice.
you're gonna leave something on, if you're gonna leave a little review, and you leave a nice one, just know that at least I'll see them.
I don't really read them much anymore, but if there's a nice one, I'd like to hear about it. Yeah, for sure.
Let me find the review. Let me toot our horn here for a minute. How do you see these ratings and reviews? This person said, essentially, we're hearing two intelligent younger adults discuss and speculate on various topics, largely from online reading. They give a thoughtful introduction, pointing out lesser-known details, and though it lacks deeper historical context, I enjoy hearing them draw conclusions with pop culture references.
Ah, fun.
I was like,
solid.
Bold of you to assume that we're younger adults.
Yes, that is a nice one. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, it was nice, and it felt good to see that.
Yeah.
We try and keep it light, try and keep it conversational. Hopefully that is fun for people.
Yeah, I guess we do, the reviews are helpful for us, and we do like to read the nice ones. If you want to write in a question or a comment or a story idea, you can also do that more privately. You can call us and leave a voicemail at 929-526-3029 or email us at podcast@allthat'sinteresting.com. Yeah, but we'll be back in a couple of weeks with the tsunami and something else after that I don't know yet. Maybe someone will either
figure it out.
Send us in a good story idea between now and then.
Yeah, let us know.
Great.
And let us know if any of your neighbors are communists.
Yes. or if you find a cache of Roman coins whilst metal detecting in your area. Yes, we'd love to hear that. All right.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for listening.
Till next time.